Growing up as the youngest Martinez sibling meant growing up in the shadow of my brother Carlos's achievements. While he collected trophies for baseball and later landed a prestigious sales job at a Fortune 500 company, I spent my childhood dismantling old electronics in the garage and asking questions that apparently annoyed everyone around me. Why does Miguel always have to take things apart? Mom would sigh when she found me with a screwdriver and another broken appliance. Carlos never caused this much trouble. By high school the pattern was set. Carlos was the golden child who brought home report cards full of A's in business classes and letters of acceptance from top universities. I was the weird kid who spent lunch period in the chemistry lab and weekends building circuit boards that nobody understood. When Carlos graduated valedictorian and headed to Northwestern on a full scholarship, the family celebrated for weeks. When I graduated 2 years later with the highest GPA in the school's history and a full ride to MIT, the dinner conversation lasted exactly 5 minutes before shifting back to Carlos's latest promotion. Chemistry, engineering, whatever Miguel does, Dad would tell his friends. Carlos is the one with real business sense. That's what matters in the real world. The dismissal stung, but I learned to channel that energy into my work. While Carlos climbed corporate ladders, I dove deeper into material science research. While he bought increasingly expensive cars to impress dates, I spent 18-hour days in university labs exploring the molecular structures of conductive polymers. My PhD dissertation on nanoscale conductivity patterns won 3 academic awards and landed me a position at Stanford's Advanced Materials Research Institute, but family dinners still centered around Carlos's quarterly sales numbers. Miguel's still in school, Mom would explain to relatives, as if pursuing a doctorate at 26 was somehow equivalent to failing to launch. Carlos bought his second house last month. The real turning point came during my postdoctoral research on flexible electronics. I'd been working on a breakthrough that could revolutionize how we manufacture computer processors, but explaining quantum tunneling effects in carbon nanotube arrays to my family was like describing color to someone who'd never seen light. They'd nod politely and immediately change the subject to Carlos's latest business trip or new girlfriend. For 3 years I worked in relative obscurity, publishing papers that earned recognition from colleagues around the world while remaining invisible to the people who mattered most to me. My research team grew from 2 graduate students to 15 full-time researchers. Major tech companies started sending representatives to our lab presentations. Patent applications piled up on my desk like autumn leaves. But at family gatherings I was still just Miguel who played with computers. The breakthrough happened on a Tuesday in November. After months of failed experiments, we finally achieved stable room temperature superconductivity in a flexible substrate that could be manufactured at scale. The implications were staggering. Phones that never needed charging, computers that operated at impossible speeds, electric vehicles that could run for months on a single charge. I stared at the test results for 20 minutes before allowing myself to believe what the data was telling me. "Dr. Martinez," my research assistant Sarah whispered, "do you realize what this means?" I realized exactly what it meant. This wasn't just an academic publication or another line on my CV. This was the kind of discovery that would reshape entire industries. But I also knew that sharing this news with my family would result in the same polite disinterest they'd shown for everything else I'd ever accomplished. So I kept quiet and focused on the patent application process. My lawyer, Dr. Rebecca Chen, had been handling intellectual property cases for major universities for 15 years, and even she seemed stunned by the commercial potential of what we'd discovered. "Miguel, I need you to understand something," she said during our first meeting about the patent application. "This isn't just another research breakthrough. If the preliminary market analysis is accurate, we're looking at technology that could be worth billions." "Billions with a B?" I asked, still not quite believing it myself. "Multiple billions. Every major tech company in the world is going to want licensing rights to this. Apple, Google, Samsung, Tesla, they'll be fighting each other for access." The patent application process took 14 months. 14 months of technical reviews, peer evaluations and legal documentation while I continued my regular research schedule and attended family gatherings where Carlos regaled everyone with stories about his promotion to regional sales director. "Miguel's still doing his little experiments," he'd say with the condescending smile I'd grown to hate. "Maybe someday he'll invent something useful." "Leave your brother alone," Mom would interject, but not in the way that actually defended me. More in the way you'd tell someone to stop teasing a child. "He's happy with his science projects. The worst was Christmas Eve, exactly 2 weeks before I received word that the patent had been approved. Carlos had just announced his engagement to his girlfriend of 8 months, and the entire extended family had gathered to celebrate at my parents' house. Uncle Roberto flew in from Phoenix, Aunt Carmen drove down from Sacramento, and all the cousins brought their spouses and children for the biggest Martinez family gathering in 5 years. Carlos held court in the living room, showing off the engagement ring and sharing stories about his proposal at a 5-star restaurant in Napa Valley. The conversation naturally shifted to his career prospects, his plans to buy a bigger house, and his trajectory toward becoming the youngest vice president in his company's history. "What about you, Miguel?" Aunt Carmen asked during a brief lull in the Carlos appreciation session. "Still working at the university?" "Still researching advanced materials," I confirmed, knowing that the technical details would glaze over their eyes within seconds. "That's nice, honey," she said in the tone people use when they're already planning to change the subject. "Any chance you'll get a real job soon?" The question hung in the air like smoke from Uncle Roberto's cigar. Real job. As if 3 years of postdoctoral research at one of the world's premier engineering institutions was somehow equivalent to unemployment. "Miguel's happy playing scientist," Carlos interjected with a laugh that drew chuckles from around the room. "Someone has to do those experiments that never amount to anything." "Stop playing scientist," he continued, gesturing with his wine glass toward the assembled family. "Your experiments are embarrassing the family. Here I am trying to build a serious reputation in business, and my little brother is still mixing chemicals like he's in high school." Everyone chuckled appreciatively at Carlos's performance. Even Mom smiled, though she made a half-hearted attempt to shush him. Dad nodded along as if Carlos had made a particularly insightful observation about my life choices. I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd known me for 31 years and realized they genuinely saw me as the family eccentric who'd never quite figured out how to be successful in the real world. Carlos had crafted a narrative where I was the perpetual student, the dreamer who would never amount to anything practical or profitable, and everyone had simply accepted it as fact. "You're right to be concerned," I said quietly, setting down my eggnog and allowing the conversation to flow back to Carlos's engagement plans and career trajectory. But inside I was counting down the days until the patent office call that I knew was coming. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my Stanford office reviewing research proposals when my phone rang with a number I'd been expecting for months. "Dr. Martinez, this is Patricia Williams from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I'm calling with excellent news about patent application US 20231247891A1. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice level. "I'm listening." "Your application for room temperature superconducting flexible substrates and manufacturing methods has been approved with full claims protection. Congratulations, Dr. Martinez. This is one of the most significant technological breakthroughs we've processed this decade." I closed my eyes and felt 3 years of work crystallize into this single moment. "Thank you. What's the timeline for publication?" "The patent will be published next week, but I should mention that word has already leaked to the industry. My colleague in licensing tells me that Apple, Google, and Microsoft have already submitted preliminary licensing inquiries. The initial market analysis suggests commercial applications worth billions of dollars. Could you be more specific about the projections?" "Dr. Martinez, based on the preliminary industry response, licensing agreements for this technology could exceed $5 billion in the first year alone. Samsung and Tesla are reportedly preparing competing offers in the $5.2 billion range just for exclusive manufacturing rights." I thanked Patricia and hung up the phone, then sat in my office chair staring at the wall for 10 minutes while the reality of the situation settled over me. In less than a week, I would go from being the family disappointment who played scientist, to holding patents worth more than most small countries' GDP. But first I had a family dinner to attend. Carlos had organized a celebration dinner at Mom and Dad's house to announce that his company had promoted him to Vice President of West Coast Sales, making him the youngest VP in company history. The whole family was invited to celebrate this latest milestone in his meteoric rise through corporate America. I arrived exactly on time, bringing flowers for Mom and a bottle of Carlos's favorite wine. The house was full of the same relatives who'd witnessed my humiliation at Christmas, all gathered to hear about Carlos's latest achievement. "Miguel," Mom exclaimed, accepting the flowers with the same surprised delight she always showed when I remembered social niceties. Carlos is going to tell everyone about his promotion. Looking forward to it, I said, taking my usual seat at the far end of the dining room table while Carlos positioned himself at the head like a CEO addressing his board of directors. For 20 minutes, Carlos held court describing his new responsibilities, his salary increase, his corner office with a view of downtown San Francisco, and his plans to expand the West Coast sales territory. Everyone listened with rapt attention, asking follow-up questions and offering congratulations that felt genuinely enthusiastic. To be completely honest, Carlos said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never experienced professional failure, I always knew I'd be successful. It just takes focus, ambition, and understanding what really matters in business. Not like some people who waste time on hobbies that never lead anywhere, he continued, glancing in my direction with a smirk. But hey, everyone needs a dreamer in the family, right? The assembled relatives chuckled politely. Uncle Roberto raised his wine glass in a toast to Carlos's achievement, and everyone joined in while I sipped my water and checked my watch. What about you, Miguel? Cousin Diana asked during the brief lull after toasts. Any updates from your lab? Actually, yes, I said, pulling out my phone as it began ringing with Patricia Williams' number. Could you excuse me? This should be quick. I stepped into the kitchen and answered on the second ring. Dr. Martinez, this is Patricia Williams from the patent office again. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time, but I wanted to update you on a development. Google, Apple, and Microsoft have submitted a joint licensing offer of $5.2 billion for exclusive manufacturing rights to your superconducting substrate technology. They're requesting an immediate response. I looked through the kitchen doorway at my family, still gathered around Carlos as he described his plans to buy a vacation home in Tahoe. Could you hold for just one moment, Patricia? Of course, Dr. Martinez. I walked back to the dining room, phone in hand, as Carlos was explaining how his promotion positioned him to eventually run the entire company. Sorry to interrupt, I said, looking directly at Carlos. But I need to take this call from the patent office. Carlos rolled his eyes. Can't your science homework wait until after dinner? It's not homework, I said, putting the phone on speaker. Patricia, could you repeat what you just told me? I'd like my family to hear this. Patricia's voice filled the dining room with professional clarity. Certainly, Dr. Martinez. I was informing you that tech giants Google, Apple, and Microsoft have submitted a joint licensing offer of $5.2 billion for exclusive manufacturing rights to your room temperature superconducting substrate technology. They're characterizing it as the most significant breakthrough in materials science in 50 years and want to begin manufacturing immediately. The dining room fell completely silent. Carlos's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Mom's fork froze over her salad. Dad's confident smile evaporated like morning mist. $5.2 billion? Aunt Carmen whispered. With AB, Patricia confirmed through the speakerphone. Dr. Martinez, I should also mention that Samsung and Tesla have indicated they'll be submitting competing offers by tomorrow morning. The preliminary market analysis suggests this technology could revolutionize consumer electronics, electric vehicles, and renewable energy storage. Carlos set down his wine glass with a hand that was suddenly less steady. Miguel, is this some kind of joke? No joke, I said, taking the phone off speaker. Patricia, I'll need to review the offers with my legal team and get back to you tomorrow morning. Of course, Dr. Martinez. Congratulations again on this extraordinary achievement. The industry is calling it the breakthrough of the decade. I hung up and looked around the table at the faces of family members who were seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time in 31 years. Carlos stared at me like I'd suddenly sprouted wings and spoken in ancient Greek. Miguel, Dad said slowly, did she say $5.2 billion? That's the current high bid, I confirmed, sitting back down and calmly reaching for the breadbasket. Though Patricia thinks it'll go higher once the patent is officially published next week. Your little experiments, Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper, are worth $5 billion? The specific breakthrough involves achieving stable room temperature superconductivity in flexible substrates that can be manufactured at industrial scale, I explained, buttering a dinner roll as if I weren't describing technology that would reshape the global economy. It has applications in everything from smartphone batteries to electric vehicle charging systems to quantum computers. Carlos opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then seemed to forget how speech worked entirely. Miguel, Uncle Roberto said, leaning forward with sudden intense interest, when you say exclusive manufacturing rights, I mean that whichever company wins the licensing agreement will control production of the most revolutionary electronic component since the microprocessor, I said. Early projections suggest it could be worth $20 to $30 billion in annual revenue within 5 years. Your brother just got promoted to vice president, Mom said weakly, as if trying to maintain some sense of family hierarchy even as the foundations of that hierarchy crumbled around her. That's wonderful for Carlos, I said sincerely. Vice president is a significant achievement. Carlos finally found his voice. Miguel, why didn't you tell us about this? I considered the question carefully before answering. You mean like how I told you about my PhD dissertation that won the National Science Foundation's Outstanding Research Award? Or how I mentioned that my postdoctoral work was featured on the cover of Nature Materials? Or how I explained that Stanford recruited me specifically because of my breakthrough research in conductive polymers? The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of Mom's antique clock in the hallway. We thought, Carlos said slowly, that you were just playing around with science projects. I was playing around with science projects, I agreed. Science projects that are apparently worth more than most Fortune 500 companies. My phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Chin, my patent attorney. Miguel, I hope you're sitting down. Samsung just called with a $6.8 billion offer. They want to begin negotiations immediately, and they're talking about additional research funding that could reach into the tens of billions. I looked at Carlos, who had spent the last hour explaining how his promotion to vice president represented the pinnacle of business success. Rebecca, could you send me the preliminary terms by email? I'm at a family dinner celebrating my brother's promotion. Of course. Miguel, I've been handling intellectual property cases for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this. You've essentially created a new category of materials science. This is going to change everything. After hanging up, I noticed that everyone at the table was staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to something that looked suspiciously like fear. Samsung offered $6.8 billion, I announced casually. Plus additional research funding. Dad cleared his throat. Miguel, I think we owe you an apology. For what? I asked, genuinely curious. For not understanding how important your work was, Mom said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. We thought you were just experimenting. I was experimenting. That's how breakthroughs happen. You experiment until you discover something that changes the world. Carlos had been unusually quiet, staring at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Genuine respect mixed with something that might have been humility. Miguel, I owe you a massive apology. I've been treating you like you were wasting your time. I had no idea you were working on anything this significant. It's okay, I said and meant it. Most people don't understand materials science research. It's not exactly cocktail party conversation. But we're not most people, Dad said firmly. We're your family. We should have paid attention. We should have asked better questions. You should have trusted that I knew what I was doing, I corrected gently. But I understand why you didn't. What I do is pretty abstract until it results in something like this. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chin. Tesla just called. $8.2 billion. They want to meet tomorrow morning. I showed the text to Carlos, who read it twice before handing my phone back with shaking hands. $8 billion, he repeated slowly. For one patent, I confirmed. Though it's based on 3 years of research and about 20 subsidiary discoveries that will probably generate additional patents over the next few years. The family dinner that was supposed to celebrate Carlos's promotion had transformed into something entirely different. Instead of toasting his vice presidency, everyone was asking me questions about superconductors, patent law, and what I planned to do with more money than any of them had ever imagined. Are you going to sell to Tesla? Cousin Diana asked. I haven't decided yet, I said honestly. There are benefits to working with different companies. Tesla could accelerate electric vehicle adoption globally. Apple could revolutionize personal electronics. Google could use it for quantum computing research. Each option would impact the world differently. Miguel, Carlos said quietly, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud to be your brother. And I'm sorry I was too stupid to see how brilliant you are. For the first time in years, Carlos's words felt genuine rather than performative. The brother who had dismissed my work as embarrassing experiments was looking at me like I was someone he genuinely admired. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." But even as I accepted his apology, I couldn't help thinking about all the times I'd tried to explain my research to family members who were too busy celebrating Carlos's quarterly sales numbers to listen. All the Christmas dinners where my academic achievements were glossed over in favor of discussing his latest promotion. All the moments when I'd felt invisible in my own family because what I was doing didn't fit their definition of success. Over the next week, the bidding war intensified. Tesla increased their offer to $9.1 billion. Apple responded with $9.8 billion plus equity in a new research division. Google offered $10.2 billion and the opportunity to head their new materials science laboratory. Samsung came back with $11.5 billion and a promise to build a dedicated manufacturing facility with my name on it. My family, meanwhile, transformed completely in their treatment of me. Mom called every day to check on the negotiations. Dad started telling his golf buddies about his son, the genius inventor. Carlos introduced me to his fiancée as, my brother the billionaire scientist. The attention felt good, I had to admit. After years of being the family afterthought, being treated like the most important person in the room was a welcome change. But it also highlighted how conditional their respect had always been. They didn't love me more than they had before. They just finally understood that I was worth their attention. In the end, I decided to license the technology to multiple companies rather than selling exclusively to one. Apple got manufacturing rights for consumer electronics. Tesla got electric vehicle applications. Google got quantum computing research. Samsung got industrial manufacturing equipment. The total licensing deals came to $18.7 billion over 7 years, with additional research funding that could reach $30 billion if certain development milestones were met. I used part of the initial payment to establish the Martinez Foundation for Materials Science Research, providing grants for graduate students whose work is too experimental or abstract for traditional funding sources. Students like I had been working on projects that their own families might not understand until the breakthrough moment arrives. Carlos's promotion to vice president was still a significant achievement, and I made sure to celebrate it properly at our next family gathering. But the dynamics had shifted permanently. I was no longer the kid brother who played scientist, while Carlos achieved real success in the business world. I was Dr. Miguel Martinez, holder of patents worth nearly $20 billion, whose experimental research had fundamentally changed how the world would manufacture electronic devices for the next 50 years. And Carlos, to his credit, never again suggested that I should stop playing scientist and get a real job. The family had finally learned that sometimes the most important breakthroughs come from the people they least expect, working on projects they don't understand, in pursuit of discoveries that will change everything. Sometimes the person mixing chemicals in the garage grows up to reshape the global economy. Sometimes playing scientist is the most serious work of all.